Well, I want to welcome you to another episode of GBAR Conversations. My name is Melvin A. Vieira Jr., your president for 2022. And I also want to go ahead and introduce you to a guest, a really great guest who understands appraisals, understands it very well as an instructor. His name is Anthony Federico. Anthony, welcome. I want to thank you very much for coming to GBAR Conversations. Can you give me a little bit of information about, what is the American National Standard Institute?
The American National Standards Institute is known easily as ANSI, is a central body that develops standards in the United States for many things. One of them, which is probably the most important to all of us in housing, is a set of standards that were first started back in 1994, 1996. There was research done, initiated by the National Association of Home Builders, who had concerns over how square footage is to be calculated in residential properties. And there are many instances with various real estate boards have run classes for educational purposes, and we began to sense that there's a lot of confusion still, or a lot of differences in how square footage is calculated and reported. Fannie Mae recently, in the interest of standardization and at the direction of their regulator, which is the Federal Housing Finance Agency, and Freddie Mac's regulator, to adopt a set of standards that would be followed across the spectrum of those that regularly are active in housing. And one of the first things that they focused on was square footage. Square footage is the language of real estate. I think most people would recognize that when a buyer is looking at a property or a seller chooses to present their property to the marketplace, they always talk about the size of the house. And that's where a great deal of confusion has started to come to the forefront, and it's in need of some kind of remediation. When I, as an appraiser, conduct research, let's say it's for a purchase transaction, I always go to the MLS source. Obviously, I'll pull the listing information on the property that I'm about to appraise, and I have to verify a lot of information about it, which means I need to verify from independent sources, not directly financially tied to the transaction. So when I see a property as being reported as being, let's say, 12 rooms, 5 bedrooms, and 3 full bathrooms, that's going to begin to set a parameter for the research that I'm going to conduct. However, when I look at public record sources and it says it's 8 rooms, 4 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, there's inconsistency. And when I look sometimes at permit records, I see that what the permit was issued for was to build an 8-room, 4-bedroom, 2.5-bath house. So now I'm beginning to fine-tune some general information. I don't like not to rely on the MLS, but I don't like to have to critique it either. So this is why it's important for us to try to speak a very similar dialogue and use terms that we recognize together.
What changes have ANSI done that we're not accustomed to?
A few important considerations. By Fannie Mae, and at this point it's only Fannie Mae, but in the future it will be others, by them adopting the ANSI standard, what happens is when you have a house design similar, let's say, to a typical cape, where it may have some dormers in the upper level, and you may have a ceiling running down the center of it, and then you have sloped walls. That's where there's a big change in your thinking that needs to occur. It may all have hardwood flooring on that level, but there are 2 things that need to be measured. One of them is the vertical height from the floor to that ceiling, that finished ceiling, and it has to be 7 feet for it to be considered above grade habitable area. And that meets Fannie Mae's definition of GLA, known as gross living area. In addition to that, though, because of the slopes, it must be no less than 5 feet vertical height from the floor to that slope. Now, there are going to be areas beyond that 5-foot mark They may still have finished flooring, and there may even be a bed in a portion of it, but that is not qualified as gross living area. So in those upper spaces, you must have no less than 5 feet vertical height and at least 7 feet vertical height.
That goes back to a long time ago when we used to talk about walkable.
Yeah, similar.
And so that was a funny thing, because when builders build, they build and they say, well, you know, I built so many square feet, but that's the actual floor plan. But then we also would talk about walkable. So that's kind of what they're kind of defining now, it sounds like.
Yeah, it's almost like creating what we call an envelope of space that is really compliant with what the standard requires. The other several things involved there are, one thing I wanted to mention though was don't construe the fact that it doesn't qualify as gross living area, that it doesn't contribute to value, because that space does. It will get reflected in the appraisal as additional living area, but not gross living area. Doesn't meet it. That'll be acceptable to Fannie Mae, and that's something we do on our end when we make out these Fannie Mae reports. The other thing that is very different, two things. One of them is when you go into an upper level and you've walked up a flight of stairs. Usually a flight of stairs is contained within a stairwell opening in the structure. Those stairs normally will fit up into the opening that's required for the stairs. So therefore, the square footage of those stairs coming up from down below and descending from up above would actually be included in both levels, because the stairs service both levels. However, in a wide open foyer, where you have a big 2-story foyer and a flight of stairs that may be so many steps up and a landing and a turn and then going up again, the rest of that open space is not calculated in the upper story, but it would be a floor in the first story. So when you get up to the second level, if you're looking out over an open foyer, it does not get added into the second level. If you go to the other side of the second level, and now you're looking out over a great room or a bonus room, that airspace does not get calculated in the second level as living area, for good reason.
So you're saying if I can do that to it, then that's being added in. But if I reach over and it doesn't, nothing there.
There's no floor there.
There's no floor there. It doesn't get added in.
Not on the second level.
On the second level, right,
It does
right.
on the first
level,
level.
right, because you can touch it and you can.
The other important thing, a couple of other important things though, is that's going to be a little bit different. I got to hit basements. Finished basements, or many basements are finished. And those basements that have a direct walkout, which some of them do because of topography, unfortunately, because part of that basement space is below the grade, it's all considered basement. So it gets valued as finished basement value as opposed to primary, fully above ground, habitable space value. It's different.
But I have a question now, because I've seen this. There are towns and areas that consider that below, that part of the basement that's exposed and it's not below grade as living area, and I've seen that happen, so I'm really trying to figure out.
I think to clear that up quickly, it's there is a distinction in the definition between gross living area and finished area.
Okay,
Okay?
perfect.
So the finished area that shows on a lot of the property record cards, whether it's Vision or Patriot as the source or the municipal office itself, what happens is, as realtors taking a listing on a property, you want to be as knowledgeable about that product as possible. So therefore, the simplest solution is to immediately break apart what you've got. You have fully above grade and below grade, partially or totally. Whatever's fully above grade may contain finished and unfinished areas and should be separated out. And then the below grade or partially below grade also. And they should both be reported in MLS. And I have a couple of other MLSs that I work with, and they have it broken up out. And it says square footage above grade or above ground, square footage below ground. And then it'll say finished square footage, which might be adding the two together.
So, as you know, there's ranches. And a lot of times the ranches are the biggest culprits of what you're talking about now. Because you look at the front of the ranch, and all of a sudden, that literally part of the house and the front is technically below the grade. Then you go out the backside, it's a walkout, but it's totally...
Looks like a full two-story.
Looks like a full two-story from the back.
Unfortunately, one of the house designs is the ranch, and that's probably the one that's most often modified. You have a single-level horizontal ranch. You have a ranch with a raised basement, sometimes called a raised ranch. Other times it's called a split entry because it has an entrance where the stairwell splits. There are also tri-levels of ranches, and there are bi-levels of ranches. So it's probably one of the most confusing housing designs. Thanks for picking on me. But
well, I had to bring that up because that's common here in Massachusetts a lot.
Totally.
It's common in other states as well, but realtors get confused exactly how to think them and how to talk about that. So I appreciate you going in depth and explaining that, because this will definitely help out our members and give them some information that they will have some questions about. So I appreciate that part. Has Freddie Mac adopted this?
no, they have not yet.
So
Fannie Mae is the only one that's actually adopting the ANSI Z765 standard for calculating what's known as square footage above grade and below grade, finished and unfinished. That's how the standard identifies it.
below grade and above grade. Below grade, what is considered below grade?
Below grade, I think if you understand the definition of what grade is the level of dirt. At what level is the dirt around the full foundation of a finished structure, which in our case is single family in most cases. So if any portion of that earth has finished area below the earth level, even just partially, that level is, which is in MLS sometimes reported as lower level, is actually basement. It's either unfinished basement or it's finished basement, and it will contribute to the value of the property, but it cannot be represented by me as what Fannie Mae defines as gross living area.
So, Tony, there are other sources that you do or you go look for to come to the determination of what a property is. And that's how you come up with the basic value, or should I say, not just a value, you come up with what the property actually has or what is actually built or says that it's built.
Yeah, the key here is what we in the appraisal profession know as relevant characteristics of the property. The relevant characteristics of the property are economic characteristics, physical characteristics, and legal characteristics. So that's one of the reasons why we will look at deeds. We will look at conditions, covenants, and restrictions pertaining to the property. That's available through the Registry of Deeds usually. We look at the tax assessor record because in many cases they've either been into the property in a prior time period and have reported certain things. They also have building permits that are made available to the assessing department as they are issued. So that information should be consistent with the building inspectors or building commissioner records. And I will often go to the house plans, especially if it's more recent construction within 10 years. I have access to the actual as-built plans for that house. But it's all part of that extra due diligence. It does take a great deal of time. But the reason why we have to go to such a length, as opposed to just putting a property, on the market to attract buyers, hopefully that are interested, is because we have to present consistent, accurate information for those that are producing or funding hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions, and they need to assess their exposure to financial risk. That could determine the interest rate that is set for a particular property and other things. It's critical that we cross-reference with independent sources, meaning independent of the transaction. So rather than asking the fox how many hens are in the hen house, we are saying it has been reported in MLS as this. I know it's been marketed as that, but is it factually that? And that's where we have to deal more with facts and accuracy.
So what did we miss? Please wrap it up and let me know.
Well, just to give you a quick recap, The thing I do want to mention that's kind of good news, I think, it depends on how it actually works out in the long run. As a result of this pandemic that we've all been experiencing, there's been a lot of rapid change that we've had to adapt to. There are new technologies that have come out that have made things possible that weren't possible previously. As an independent appraiser, I have a diversity of clients. I don't rely exclusively on mortgage financing transactions. I do many other things. But I will say that there is an interest that Fannie Mae has expressed, and Freddie Mac has joined them in this, for desktop appraisals. What is a desktop appraisal? Quite simply, a desktop appraisal, which is going to be rolled out tomorrow or in the next day or so, is an appraisal assignment where a lender submits a loan application to Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac and says, this is the loan amount, and these are all the other documentation, and this is the property, this is the price. It must be a purchase, and it must be a principal residence. It can't be a purchase for an investment property. Fannie Mae will run that through what they call the Uniform Collateral Data Portal, the UCDP. It will spit back a finding to the lender and say, based on what has been submitted, this property qualifies for a desktop appraisal. The lender has the option of either saying, okay, or we don't feel good about that, we want a traditional appraisal. The desktop does not require the appraiser to go to the property and go through it. The appraiser can rely on other credible sources of information, not exaggerated sources, but credible, where I can confirm it with several different reliable sources. Yeah, this information is sufficient for me to draw conclusions. One of the great things is many real estate agents are submitting floor plans, and a floor plan is a requirement for the desktop appraisal. Because I'm not going to the property, I need to be able to rely on something. Now, a floor plan is different than a building sketch. A building sketch is just the perimeter footprint. The floor plan that Fannie Mae wants to see is the exterior-only calculations. They don't need the measurements of all the rooms, but they want to see interior walls and doors, egresses and ingresses, and identification of what those spaces are: bedroom, kitchen, dining room, family room.
Right.
That's something that, if it's made available to me, I can say I have other sources that I can confirm that perimeter calculation is very similar, very minimal amount of tolerance between that and what's already in my public record sources. I can rely on it.
Is there a way that the agent, if they don't like it, they can dispute it, or can the other person, or is there like a review process that if the first one, even though I know you said the lender, if they want, they can send somebody out, but let's say the value doesn't come back at that number, is there a way to question that?
Well, backing up just a tiny bit, if let's say a desktop appraisal assignment comes to me, I look at what I have for information to work with in a pre-research capacity, and I make a judgment call. I either have sufficient information to produce a credible assignment result, or I do not have enough, and therefore I can communicate to the lender and say, I need to conduct an exterior inspection of the property. If they decide not to allow for that, then I simply withdraw from the assignment.
Okay.
So the appraiser has that option. If there is a disagreement with the finding, I believe that if a real estate agent who has a financial interest in the assignment wants to challenge the findings of an independent who has no financial interest in the assignment, they're welcome to do it.
Okay.
But whether a reconsideration of value would be worthwhile, it's individual.
Okay.
Not saying that there aren't different degrees in competency between appraisers, just like there are different degrees of competency in realtors.
Yeah.
But there has to be support for the finding. It's always market-based evidence. It's not something we make up.
Thank you. I appreciate that. That's you gave us some great information, Anthony. I really, really appreciate you coming and sitting down today. And I just want to say thank you to every single one of you all who've tuned into this. Hopefully you've learned something. Hopefully you've gained something. Hopefully you can bring this back to your clients. Hopefully this raises your ability to a higher level. Hopefully it just gives you one more up on your competitor. I just want to say thank you very much for tuning in to GBAR Conversations. This is Melvin A. Vieira Jr., your president for 2022, and I look forward to seeing you on the next GBAR Conversation. I want to say thank you again, Tony.
You're very
Have a great
welcome.
day.